WhiskyCast. Brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
Seattle's known for lots of things. The Pike Place Market, seafood, and of course, coffee. But whiskey, not as much yet. While there are craft distillers in the area, Westland Distillery is the only one with nationwide distribution. The distillery is a few blocks south of Seattle's Stadium District, and it's actually the second Westland Distillery.
We started in 2010 down in the little neighborhood called South Park. Back then we were making about 5 barrels of whiskey every week, which at the time made us one of Washington State's largest distilleries. And at that time we knew that we needed to find a bigger space. We knew that we needed to scale up. So we found this space and fell in love with it. This is a 96-year-old crane factory that we're in. This used to be the headquarters for the Ederer Crane Company. All of the wood that you see back here, all of this is original to when the building was built in 1919. So you can see these are solid timber pieces. I mean, it's really kind of magnificent stuff. But that was it. It was a shell of a building. And so it took 18 months to convert this into a working whiskey distillery. So we got started in production here in mid-2013 and scaled up to about 40 casks of whiskey a week. So as far as we know, I think that makes us the largest malt whiskey distillery in North or South America. Could be wrong about that, but I think that's the case. Certainly one of the largest malt whiskey distilleries. And here we are. So now we've got more than 3,000 casks of whiskey stocked away.
Westland looks a lot like other small distilleries, perhaps a bit more dog-friendly than most, but there's one big difference. While most craft distillers make a variety of whiskeys, Matt Hoffman focuses on single malt, intensely focuses on single malt.
I went onto a malting company's website and I found the pale malt. Okay, that's what the whiskey textbooks say. You need pale malt or peated malt, but here's brown malt or here's chocolate malt. And my mind began to wonder, like, why do they never talk about these things in whiskey making? And that's because these kinds of malts are considered brewers' malts. And pale malt and peated malt, those are distillers' malts. I mean, brewers use the pale malt too, of course, but for some reason that boundary has never really been crossed. I mean, there's hundreds of years of brewing and malt whiskey distilling history. And I think that because we're so new to this, and this is actually a big part of culturally what we're all about at Westland is that we're not set in that history. We don't have all of this culture that's telling us we've been making whiskey this way for a long time, and to change drastically could be damaging. To us, you know, that kind of culture of innovation and progressive thinking and creativity, that's what the Pacific Northwest is all about.
Westland makes its 5-grain malt whiskey from 75% Washington State grown barley, but its peated barley comes all the way from Scotland. That's about to change. But to get the story, you have to head west across Puget Sound to the Olympic Peninsula.
It's really going to be very, very dusty out here.
Where Westland co-founder Emerson Lamb took us to the one and only one peat bog in Washington that's legal to harvest.
I mean, this peat is unique, certainly in Washington State.
The government started regulating wetlands more than 40 years ago, except for this one.
Yeah, so it was owned by the Air Force, and they were doing the same thing. So they were making adsorbents for use essentially on military bases, and eventually they sold it in 1998 to the Wright brothers. And so it was during the time that the EPA was being created in the 70s. You know, this place was producing quote unquote wartime supplies. So grandfathered in.
It hasn't rained in 68 days, but when the peat is underwater, it doesn't matter quite as much.
I mean, and this was cut last week. We cut these chunks last week with the other group, and you can feel already how dry they are, even for their size. It's pretty amazing.
The peat from this bog is being taken to a malting house in the Skagit Valley north of Seattle, where Westland is working with local barley farmers and Washington State University researchers to produce locally peated barley with a provenance.
But we can't say this is where this malt actually came from. Like, this is, this is coming from Roosin Farms from this vintage, from this plot of land. We can't do that because of the way the system works. So these guys have constructed machines that malt 15,000 pounds at a time, as opposed to the smallest batch that is available from our other primary supplier, Great Western, is something like 375,000 pounds.
Except for the casks on display at the distillery in Seattle, all of Westland's casks mature on the Olympic Peninsula. Emerson Lamb's family has had manufacturing facilities in Hoquiam for decades, and some of those buildings are now being repurposed from lumber to whiskey, like this dunnage warehouse.
These are whiskeys without a product. We don't make products in here, we make whiskeys, and we figure out products in blending. All this stuff over here is peated and 100% Washington malt stuff, generally over here.
This building is the future of Westland Distillery, not for the distillery itself, that'll stay in Seattle, but this big building once housed the Lamb family's fabrication workshop for its businesses. It's now going to be turned into a giant warehouse capable of holding 23,000 barrels of whiskey. Keep in mind, so far, Westland has only filled about 3,100 casks. For more cask-strength conversation on whiskeys, with the people who make them and the people who drink them, join us each week for WhiskyCast. In Hoquiam, Washington, I'm Mark Gillespie.